Good morning, officially. This is a restorative yoga class. Restorative yoga, again, just to reiterate, is it's in the slower paced yoga class camp. So with yin and some of the other practices of that nature. But restorative, it has a particular notion, which is that we're, our goal, if that's the right word, and I'm not sure it is, but is to relax as deeply as possible. So we're going to use lots of different soft things like blankets and pillows to prop the body up in these poses so that the body will completely relax into the shape. So there's not a lot of tugging, there's not a lot of stretch sensation that we're going for with this practice. We're going for the body's kind of in the yoga pose, but it's being gently held. It's almost like we're pouring ourselves into a yoga pose mold, if if I can use the ceramics analogy. In any case, so get yourself, just surround yourself with a few things that are soft. So I've got some throw pillows within easy reach. I've got a yoga bolster pillow. I've got a bunch of blocks. I've got one blanket plus a couple more. If I stretch out of the out of the camera zone, I can grab a couple more blankets. So we just want kind of an assortment of things to get started with so that everything is nice and cushy. Now we're going to start with probably one of the more challenging of these poses, which is, I like to call it river pose or mountain stream pose, because the image is really clear for me on what we're trying to do. So if you can picture water sort of rolling over rocks as it kind of tumbles down, that's the notion, and our body is like the water, and we're going to put some yoga props into our under our body to be like the rocks. So I'm going to do this with two props. I've got one pillow I'm going to put under my legs. If you don't have one of these longer pillows, you can substitute this with a rolled up quilt. That's all this really is. It's just batting, quilt batting inside of a case. So if you had a quilt that you could fold in half and roll up, you'd get a bolster. It's, you know, it's nice to have it encased because it stays together. But you can easily make yourself some yoga bolsters at home with some older quilts or whatever that you might have laying around. You just, if you fold them so that they're the right length and then roll them up really, really tight, and then you could put it in like a pillowcase, or you could tie it with some ties to hold it in place. All of that stuff would be really great. So I'm going to take this one and put it under my legs, and I'm going to use a blanket under my upper back. So you can roll the blanket really, really tight, like you would roll a Swiss roll cake if you were on the Great British Baking Show, right? You want it to be really tight, so you have lots of layers. If you want the blanket to be quite forceful and the height underneath your upper back to be quite dramatic, this is the way to go. For me, because that part of my spine is not particularly mobile, I like it a little flatter. So instead of rolling it, I folded this blanket 3 times, in half again, and then in half one more time, so that it's about the length of my spine or about the width of my chest. That's the place I leave this blanket when I'm not using it. And then I just roll it up into thirds. There might be a little bit of fringes left over, no worries. So this goes sideways, and it's gonna go underneath my upper back about where the bottom of the shoulder blades lives, because I want my head and neck to rest comfortably on the floor. And then my legs are gonna swing up over the top of this guy. And we're gonna stay in this pose for about 7 or 8 minutes. It may not be super comfy at first, but we can modify with some extra props as needed. So if you need an extra prop, like an extra blanket under your head or something like that, go for it. Okay. So I'm trying to position myself so that it feels like if I draw like a little line right there from the bottom of my breastbone straight down, it'll intersect this blanket, which is what it's doing. And then I can, my shoulders are resting on the floor, my head is comfortably resting on the floor, and then I have to decide how I want to do the arms. So I could do my arms overhead, I could do like a cactus. For today, I'm going to do more of a cactus shape. I just have to reorganize a little bit here. Switch some of my spoopy props to other places. Okay. body settle. Now again, initially it may not be quite right, so I might have to do some little adjustments. Occasionally I have to kind of scoop my tailbone just a little bit and make my back a little longer, and then come back over the bolster with my legs. The bolster might need to go a little farther away or a little closer to the hips. So you'll know after you sort of lie still for a second and feel where the pose, if there's any tugging, right? If there's any places where the pose feels a little too sharp, then you modify those places. I'm going to scooch down just a little bit more so that I can have a little more space for my arms. Instead of trying to cram myself in up there. Since we're going to stay a while, it's okay. Oh, yeah, that's better. It's okay to take some time to get it just right. Don't worry about kind of rustling around a little bit. Use that first couple minutes, a minute or two, to get it just right and make any changes you need. Because now it's much more comfortable because I can take my arms a little wider than I had space up there. So take your time, adjust yourself in your space and on the props. And essentially what we're doing is a pose that's like the fish pose in yoga. And if that one's not familiar to you, maybe cobra is familiar, where you press up like a little cobra with your belly on the floor. So this is sort of like that, but upside down, which is so we're kind of broadening out the chest, and there's this sort of sense of sending the breastbone higher into the air. That's what we're going for here, but without it being too much. Just the barest hint of sensation is all we're after. So we can relax, and then after you've spent a little bit of time just breathing and letting go and getting your body adjusted right, you can come to the sort of more meditative aspects of this practice, which is to say to kind of either focus on the breath, so you're feeling how the breath moves through the body in this shape. You can notice the rise and fall of the chest, or the way the abdominal muscles are responding to the breath, or you can feel the breath through the nostrils, that sort of thing, because we've, the head might be adjusted slightly differently, the ribs are certainly adjusted differently. The breath comes and goes with different physical patterns, and that's interesting. Or you can just try to stay present on this notion of letting go. So kind of tracing through the body with your mind and noticing any places there might be muscles that are holding or gripping or tensing up. Can you release those places? I like to do both.
stay for a couple more minutes here. We're almost at the end. Take about 4 more breaths. So if your mind was off wandering, just bring it on back. That's one of the things about the mind, is it does like to do things. Usually rather specific things, like make lists and plan for stuff that's not happening just yet, or to remember stuff that's from the past. That's probably its favorite things to do. Make up complete and utter fantasy stories about the future. In a wide variety of ways. In any case, if your mind was doing any of those things, come on back to your breath. Couple more rounds here. Okay. So to get out of this, we're going to just go really gently. So I'm going to bend my knees and roll to my side just enough that I can sort of prop myself up to slide the blanket out. Oh. And then we're going to come back onto our back. Now, we're going to do some movement patterns that are really nice for the shoulders, and we're going to do some movement patterns that are nice for the hips as well, hip flexor area. So we're going to take one that we've kind of been doing with the hips, and then add like just a little kind of more free form kind of movement to it. We'll just add a little bit to it. And then for the shoulders, we're going to do these 3 movements that I'm a fan of. So we're going to start with one shoulder movement, then we'll do some hip things, and then we'll come back to some shoulders, because those will kind of link us into the next pose that we're going to do. So we're going to essentially reach down with the arms, and then as we lift the arms, we're going to keep that same notion of stretching, right, through the arms. So my pinkies are down, my thumbs are up, my palms face in toward each other, and essentially my legs are in this position called constructive rest, somewhere in that neighborhood, so that there's no real tugging on the pelvis or the low back. So we're going to reach down nice and long and stretch the arms at every point. I'm not going to stop next time at these points, but at every point I'm sort of stretching through the arms, right? So we can feel the shoulder blades and all the muscles around the arms doing these really like landscape changing pattern of connection, contraction and release. Okay, so that's the notion. So I'm being kind of choppy with this one, but now we're going to make it just a smooth movement, just so you can get the idea. So we're reaching this whole time through the arms, trying to get them a little bit longer. And you go as far over your head as you can go. I go until my thumbs touch the ground, but you could go less than that if your shoulders have some old injuries and things. New injuries. Either way. So we're stretching up and over, reaching, stretching up and over, reaching. We're going to do this 2 more times. Oh, I love this thing. I could do this every day. In fact, I often do. Okay. Last one. While you're in the middle of it, it's quite interesting, but what I like about this is it sort of restores a level of mobility to my shoulders when done with, especially when done with the other couple of shoulder patterns. Oh, that just feels really nice. So, you know, combined with the elevated chest and this little kind of movement pattern in the shoulders, oh, feels delicious. Okay, so we're going to take one arm in the air and just shake it. And just shake it until you feel almost like the bones all the way down the arm, wrist, fingers, all are kind of rattling. I'm going to do that for another 2 breaths. Okay, and then we're going to just let the arm kind of release. Notice if there's a difference between your 2 arms. For me, there is, and the difference is quite pleasant. Like that arm relaxes into the floor a little bit better. So I'm inclined to do the other way, even though I'm not as good at shaking the left arm as I am at shaking the right arm. Feels like more of an effort. So kind of shaking it. Again, I'm trying to get this sort of sense of like the bones rattling all the way through the whole arm. 2 more breaths. And then let the arm come down. And even with not being quite as rhythmic in my left arm, it still feels really nice. All right, so now we're going to do some work for the hips. Now, this is the part that I've done before. So if you've watched the video before or been here with me live, then you'll know. But if not, then I'm going to talk you through it. So we're going to take the toes off the ground. Now, my mat is quite slick, and there's carpet underneath it, and that's all very slippery. If the mat that I'm using is sticky, you have 2 choices. You can either move to the edge so that your foot can glide on the bare floor, or you can like try putting on a sock, for example. Like sometimes socks will glide a little bit more easily. And then if none of that works, you can gently sort of pull the weight slightly off your leg so that you're just barely grazing the floor. It's best to do that with the hip completely relaxed and not to be kind of trying to hold your leg up, but we'll work with it as best we can. So the ideal situation is that you can glide, so there's no contraction at the hip here. So we're going to lengthen out right through the top of that area, right there through the front of the hip, okay? And then we're going to glide it back. Now, sometimes I have to hop over the edge of my mat, and that's fine. So if you kind of have to lift slightly over the edge. But again, as best we can, the smoothest possible ride out and then back. And then out. We're going to do 3 each in these different patterns that we're going to do. So this is just straight down the center, toes pointing straight up. And then we're going to do 3 where we're going to add a little external rotation. So we're going to stretch out, rotate the leg so the toes point towards the right, diagonal, draw the leg back, bring it to the center, okay? Out to the center, so the toes are pointing up. We're going to rotate the leg, draw it back in that kind of externally rotated state, rotate it back, okay? 1 more like that. Now I think those 2 are a little bit easier. The next one is a little more challenging. So we're going to press the leg all the way out, feel that stretch, rotate it inward, and try to draw it back, and then bring it to the center. So I don't have as much range of motion there. It's a little more challenging. Rotate it in, draw it back. Again, you may have to like kind of lightly skip over the edge of your mat. That's all right. Come out, again, as smooth as you can. Rotate in, pull the leg back. Okay. So now the free form part. So we're going to take this leg in the air, and you can use this leg as it is, or you can relax it onto the ground. But essentially all we're going to do is just sort of free form a movement pattern. It can be a shake like we did before. If shaking your leg feels kind of awkward, just kind of weave it through space a little bit. Feel for the range of motion that you have. notice how the body might have some little places that are tighter. This is really kind of, in addition to releasing tension out of the psoas muscle, which is this big hip flexor muscle that lives through the torso all the way through the hip and around to the back of the leg, it also serves to sort of help us notice all the other things, all the other muscle groups around the hip, which is quite complex. And we can kind of release any places, like right there for me, there's a little tight place. So just adding a little bit of a shimmy. Okay. So then bring the legs back down. You can do these little windshield wipers. I'm a big fan of these. Back and forth a little bit, and then come back to this place where we're just resting through the legs and just feel. So notice if there's a difference kind of in the way your right hip and your left hip feel. For me, the right hip has kind of a pleasant warmth to it from moving the muscle around most likely. And it also just feels like it's slightly more receded, a little bit closer to the ground than my left hip. So that, to me, says, I did something. I kind of released a little bit of tension there. So I'm going to do it on the other side. So same idea. We're going to start with these little gliding movements. So feet are resting on the floor, toes on the left foot come up. And then to the degree possible, I'm just going to glide my leg all the way out straight, doing 3, where my toes stay pointing straight up, and I'm trying to aim that sense of length right there through the front of the hip. And in between each one, I'm letting myself completely relax. So stretching out, pulling it back, and let it go. Okay. And then one more time like that. Stretching out. That one was good. Bring it back. And let the body relax. So now we're going to do the little external rotation. So stretch the leg out. We're going to rotate open. Hold on, I got to move the pumpkin. Okay. Draw back and swing it around. Stretch it out. Rotate to the external. I'm going to give it one little extra bit of stretch right there. Rotate it and then come on back to the center there. Stretch it out. Rotate. Feel myself just reach just a little bit longer through the muscle right there. And then I'm going to bring it back. Now it's going to be the internal rotation. So I'm going to stretch out through the leg, toes pointing up, rotate them inward, draw the leg back, and bring it to the center. So stretch, rotate. It's a different place that I feel the release and the tension and the stretch. It's really nice. Okay. Now, I've done those 3. So I'm going to give myself a chance to just start to move this leg around in some kind of shaking. I'm liking the shaking right now, so I'm going to stick with that. But just kind of moving the leg, again, through some motions. Not too big a range of motion. You don't want it to necessarily tug really hard on your low back or anything like that, but just giving that leg some freedom to move so that you can sort of find any places that feel a little tight or a little sensitive. And then as we work, we'll just try to relax those places with the last, number of poses that we do. Okay, so I'm going to do 2 more breaths of this kind of movement pattern. And then I'm going to just bring that leg back to the center where I had it. Do some of my little favorite windshield wipery moves. Now you can roll your knees into your chest and massage your low back instead if you like. This helps kind of just soften any tension that I may have been holding, trying to put my leg back into place. And then just relaxing and noticing how this went. Okay, so we're going to do a movement pattern in the shoulder where we're going to roll onto the side. So there's going to be one of these sides where I'm going to face away from you. So I'm going to do the first side facing towards you so you can hear me really well. And then the second side, we're going to do exactly the same motion. I'll just be facing the other way, and hopefully this will make sense. So we're going to take the arms up. So the arm that I'm going to pull on first is my left arm, because that will roll me to the right. So you can do either one. I'm just going to tell you what I'm up to. So I've got my arms about chest height or so, shoulder height. I'm going to reach over and grab my upper arm with my right hand. So I've got my left upper arm in my hand. Now you can position the arm lower or higher, depending. I like mine as close to my chest as I can get it, which is unfortunately only so close. So in any case, I'm going to pull the arm across, and as I'm pulling my arm across, simultaneously I'm using all the shoulder muscles on my left shoulder to try to pull my shoulder blade back down into the ground. Or it's the same thing, same action into the body, right? So instead of letting it get pulled outward towards my armpit, I'm trying to pull that shoulder blade back into the center of my back. And while doing that, I'm working with the resistance of my right arm, kind of pulling across. So shoulder blades going down and in. Right arm's trying to kind of pull me across. And I'm just meeting in a place in the center where nothing's really going on. There's no movement happening because of this little sort of stalemate between these two actions. Okay. Oh, I'm going to do one more breath like this. Okay, so now I'm going to let go by just rolling to the side. Now, I like to have something under my head. I'm going to use this pillow. You could use a block, or you could use a folded blanket. The other thing that we need is enough room that we can make an arc over the head. Now, there's some dicey positioning of the arm. So out of the neck, back of the brain, through the shoulder joint. So there's a little channel, a little opening between the collarbone, which is here, the top of the shoulder blade here, and then the head of the arm bone. And there's a ton of nerves that come out of this area and either go through the torso or through the arm, okay? So the place that's the most tricky is when we get the arm in this sort of slightly diagonal position to slightly diagonal position. Everything else is going to be really easy, generally fairly easy going on your shoulder. That little area is tricky. So what you can do is when you're sweeping the circle, keep your arms slightly higher in the air to prevent any sort of pinching in that location, or you can come up to this kind of point where you're almost about horizontal with the shoulder and or the opposite shoulder, and then come straight across. Okay, so we're going to reach the arm out and stretch through it. We're trying to make the biggest possible circle, and I let my chest go with this movement pattern. Coming around. Oh, just be kind to those little spaces where there might be some places that get pinchy. Just re-angle your arm. Oh, as needed. I'm going to do two more. Okay, so now I'm going to let this turn me into a spinal twist. And we're going to stay with this pose for a little while, and then we'll do the other shoulder. So I'm going to bring it all the way around, and as I go, I'm taking my upper back with me around into space. Now for me, it helps to have something for the legs to rest on so that the spinal twist has the right amount of twistiness and not too much. Anywhere I've got a bone that kind of hangs out in space, it's a good idea to put something under it. So I'm going to put this guy underneath my legs, and I'm going to put a little tiny support also under my head, just because there's a tiny bit of a gap between my head and the floor. A little bit more upper back curve than the back of my skull. And that just gives me kind of a place to land. So I'm interested in feeling the twist in the spine, but so gently, so lightly that there's not a lot of tug on my chest muscle. So there's a little bit of a kind of opportunity for something to happen here at the chest and the shoulder, so I don't want that to feel like it's being pulled out of place, and then this outer hip can get a little too spicy. You also may want to experiment with where you want your neck to go. I'm going to kind of turn my neck more in line with my legs. You can turn it the opposite way. And then once we're here, so we kind of play with the pose until we get it settled. And then once we're here, we just let go as best you can. Add any extra adjustments that you need along the way. As you go, as things settle, you might have to settle the pose again. But for the most part, try not to fidget. Let your body relax. If you're extra fidgety, you probably need more props. Stay for about 2 more minutes here. Just notice if the body has started to let go, and do those little kind of traces through the body with your mind to just look for little pockets of tension if there are any. I tend to find them kind of around my face. My jaw or my lips might feel a little thin or tight, or my eyes might feel like there's a little bit of a gripping in the muscle that controls the eye. So just see if you can let go a little more deeply, and then again, kind of try to follow the pattern of the breath. I find it really interesting to breathe in a twist, because again, the breath moves in a really unusual pattern compared to the way it does when we're just hanging out. Take about 3 more breaths. And I'm going to peel out of this really slowly. So the first thing I'm going to do is just take my top leg and sort of slide it back to neutral. And then I'm going to sort of let everything else kind of gently follow. unfurl. I do a little bit of movement, but mostly I just want to lie still for a second and let my body adjust, because I definitely feel a difference on one side versus the other after that shape. Notice if that's true for you as well. Now, we're going to do the other side, the shoulder movement, and then also the twist. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of put my pillow over here, and my blanket, so that I've got things where I want them to go. I'm going to need a little support for my head. Okay. So if you don't quite feel ready to move yet, don't. Sometimes I'll hang out for a full movement, or a full minute or longer between movements. If you're feeling like you can lie on your side, then that's what we're going to do next. So you'll roll, and then again, we're going to move the arm through this kind of circle. So we just need enough room that we're not going to run into any furniture. And then again, kind of feel out on your first round, like what angle do I want to keep my arm at so that I'm kind to this area where the nerves flow out of my brain, spinal cord. So we're going to make these little circles, kind of stretching the arm longer as we go. Do that one more time as a movement, and then I'm going to let this last version turn into my twist. And again, I'm going to add the little extra bits of prop just to make this a little kinder. So to find the placement of the props such that everything kind of settles and rests somewhere. And there's not too much tug in any one direction. I also have to get the wrinkles out of the blanket. There's no tug in any one direction, not through the chest, not too much through the hip. Just the feeling of the body assuming the shape, but not a lot of stretchiness or tug. And then just relaxing into that. Kind of just checking in, part of the way through the pose, with yourself just to see, like, are you letting go everywhere? Or is there a sense or some place where there's just the tiniest little bit of holding on? And I'm finding my calf muscle, for some reason, is a little bit grippy. So I'm gonna try re-angling my props to see if I can get rid of that grip and let my calf muscle relax a little bit more. Let's try it. Sometimes I can hold tension in my body, like almost like under the radar, like completely outside of my conscious awareness. And so it's helpful to use your time with these poses to kind of scan through and check in and notice if some of that is happening, if your body's tensing up to hold itself here when you're trying to actually relax. That's the goal. And as I'm letting that calf muscle relax, there's just a kind of a whole kind of chain reaction of other things that come into my awareness. So just noticing, letting go as best you can. Just this practice of finding tension and releasing it is really helpful for our nervous systems. And then we have kind of practice of doing that later when other things are causing us to tense up. Inside of our last minute here. And about 6 more breaths or so. Again, I'm going to peel out of this pose just ever so gently by just bringing the top leg around first. And finding a way to try to stay as relaxed as possible as I let my body unwind this shape. Oh. All right, now what we're gonna do next is we're gonna come to a seated position, but we're not in a hurry. So the way that I do this, after I've had a chance to kind of jiggle around and move in the way that feels appropriate, is I roll to the side. I'm gonna prop my arm up here under my head, and then I'm gonna come up letting my head sort of be the last thing that comes all the way up.
Okay, now I'm gonna need some props for this next pose. So I'm gonna use some yoga blocks and I'm gonna use a pillow. So I've got a bunch of blocks here. If you don't have those things, a chair works really great. You kind of just slide a chair in over top of you, or you can just use a lot of pillows and blankets. Just find whatever, you know, props are gonna work to create a little bit of height. Because what I'm gonna do is fold forward, but I only want to fold as far forward as my pelvis kind of lets me go, and then I want to fill in the gap between there and my forehead. So that's what I'm gonna do. So I've got my legs arranged in this butterfly position. You might need some support under the legs. I'm gonna use this blanket for that purpose. So I'm gonna put that in between here, the floor and my thigh bone, so that that's resting on a surface. And then I'm taking this little stack of yoga blocks and bringing them up high enough, along with a pillow, that I can rest forward and have my head supported, right? So I'm leaning in with my head supported. And again, I'm gonna, I'm gonna lift my head when it's time for me to talk to you, because I'm not sure if you'll hear me talking down into the depths of this pillow. But you just want it sturdy enough that it's not necessarily gonna fall apart, that you can lean into it so that you can let go. Okay, so this guy we're gonna hold for around 5 minutes. If you would be more comfortable with your legs straight, you can certainly do that. Just kind of make them straight and like a tiny bit of a V, not super wide, but just a little V-ish shape would be good. So right now I'm kind of just trying to stay focused on the sensation of the breath in my back. That feels really nice, and it's a very pleasant sensation. Again, we're about halfway through here, so it's a nice time to just check in and make sure, would it be better if you had some extra support under your hips, or any of the bony places feeling tender? That sort of thing. And then just, with your neck and your head, make sure you've got your head positioned, that your neck doesn't feel like it has to tense up to hold you steady. 5 or 6 more breaths here. Take 2 more breaths, and then I'm going to gently peel myself out of here. So I'll do this. I'm just going to sort of begin to tilt myself back away from the shape. Oh. And then I'll straighten out the legs. And you can certainly do some movement if that would feel like a better idea. Oh, I'm going to keep those blocks handy because those are going to play prominently in my next pose. So we're going to do a little elevated leg position. It's a partial inversion was the word I was trying to come up with. Now, I'm going to do this with some pillows and these blocks. You could also, if you have room in your space, to do like legs up the wall where you can put your hips right up against a wall and your legs straight up, so you make an L shape with your body against the wall. That's a really lovely pose. If you don't have a wall, but you could throw your legs up over the edge of your couch or over the edge of a chair, those are also great ways to do this pose. In this space with the camera setup and everything, then what I'm about to do is better for me. It has a great name, Stonehenge pose, which I think is really fun. At least, I think it's great. So I'm going to put a blanket down. That's going to be for my head. Kind of nice and smooth, not too many, no wrinkles in there. And then I'm going to build up a little structure with these blocks. And the pillow's going to lay on top. So I've turned the blocks as high up, I'm going to put that guy in the middle, as high up as I can so that they are at their tallest edge. So these blocks have a 9-inch height here at their highest edge, and then I add the pillow, so that gives me a little bit more height. Now, this is probably not quite as tall as my femur bone is, but that's about what we're going for. So if you put your legs up and over the chair and your hips come off the ground because your femur bones aren't quite that long, for example, then you want to fill in the bottom with some blankets. In this case, that's not gonna be a problem because it's not quite that tall. But you just adjust your body with props to the furnishings that you're gonna use. Now, straight up the wall, you can have your hips just resting on the floor, but if there's any sense of lift in your pelvis, some of us with our hamstrings, if the hamstrings are tight enough, in the way that they're structured with the back of the leg and the pelvis, they'll actually lift the low back off the floor. And if you find that to be true, fill that space in with a blanket, a couple blankets if needed, so that you have a lot of space. I'm going to just essentially put my shins up on this pillow. So sometimes I knock this over in my pursuit of this pose. So if that happens, I will reset. But otherwise, I'm going to lie down and I'm going to put my legs up. See what I mean? Sometimes I exert way too much pressure. Okay, so essentially, this is the idea. Is I'm going to put my legs up over this guy without having to do quite so much adjusting. Maybe we should put that guy over on this side. So heavier base where the pressure wants to go. We'll find out. So I'm going to get close enough that I can rest my legs. And essentially I try to get my legs to rest right where there's a block. Okay. So my shins are elevated, and then I've got this little guy here for my head and neck. And I just get rid of any little wrinkles in the blanket, because you'll feel them. Okay.
shoulder blade snuggle edge. So again, like if my legs were straight up a wall, that's where I would have a little bit more of that elevated shape. This is a nice shape though, and it does kind of help blood flow more easily to the heart, so the heart rate, blood pressure might come down a little bit, so that's nice. If you start to feel dizzy, you can definitely build up a little more support into your head, so there's more equal. Oh. It also gives me some freedom to kind of move my ankle joints a little bit and release any tension that might be there. So some kind of an inverted posture is nice to do in most restorative sessions, whether you're doing an inverted posture with a piece of furniture or the wall. Some kind of a posture where you get your legs up is generally a nice idea. And we're going to stay here for like another 3 minutes. You can, if you want to slide into Shavasana a little bit earlier than that, you can certainly do that. We're just going to turn this into corpse pose when we're done. Like to think of restorative yoga as like if a sloth did yoga, what kind of yoga would a sloth do? And this is what I've come up with. So they must. Trees have this kind of very gentle kind of movement that they do in the wind, and even when it's not a particularly windy day, there's this just really gentle, almost like it's not a sway exactly, but it sort of is. It's just, you can feel the wood of the tree just kind of gently sort of creaking with some kind of shifting pressure from the world around it, the wind or the air. And so it's so interesting and so I don't know if you've ever been like up in a tree for a long period of time. So this may not make any sense, but I used to have a job where I would hang out in trees sometimes, and so they just have this very interesting, very slow rhythm. And so I imagine that creatures like sloths who hang out in trees, right, where they kind of pause for long periods of time, they might also sort of feel that really gentle rhythm. And that's kind of what we're doing with restorative yoga, is we're trying to find these more gentle rhythms in the body, like the heart rate shifts, the breath patterns, things that are sort of the movement that's always with us, but that maybe we don't always pay attention to, because it goes slower or a slightly less intense rhythm than the rest of the stuff we do with our lives, the busy things. It's a chance to get in tune with some of those other rhythms. Okay, so all I'm going to do to transition here is I'm going to get rid of these blocks. So my legs are at a slightly lower height. So I'm just going to kind of reach down here and shove them out. And then find my pillow again and bring that back. I might wind up having to do some adjustments with my hands, but right now my legs are doing a pretty good job. Okay, so just letting the legs stretch out and relax. And then I'm gonna, because there's a little bit of, it's not super bright here in this room today, but there's a little bit of brightness. I'm just gonna take a little layer of my blanket and cross it over and tuck it in. Now in the wintertime, I'm a big fan of doing this in general, so you kind of bring one layer of blanket in at a time and just sort of tuck it in around your head. So I've got one layer that I'm going to use as an eye pillow, but every other layer I can just sort of tuck in. And what this does is it creates this kind of little pod around the head where there's a little bit of sound deprivation because my ears are slightly covered. And then there's a really nice little gentle neck support that comes up from tucking the edges of the blanket up underneath. And so sometimes these little head pods, in the summertime it's a little too warm for me, but in the winter it feels really nice. So you can build a little pod around your head with a blanket. And then if you have a weighted eye pillow, you could put that on top where the eyes are, just to give yourself a little bit more dark, so it's a little darker, and there's kind of a little muffling of sound. So if your neighbors are mowing the lawn, this can be a helpful way to do Shavasana. And then all we're doing with this last pose is, again, just taking all the pressure off the body and letting go one last time. So we're just going to take a moment to check in with the breath. Take a nice big long breath. And let it go with a sigh. Then you can start to kind of wiggle and stretch. Oh, I like to do a little back massage at the end of that. Oh. Plus you can hug your favorite yogi. And then again, I'm gonna roll and come up with like the neck being sort of the last thing that makes it all the way up. We have to move a lot of props out of the way. So thank you for joining me for a little restorative yoga. I think it's a great way to kind of end a week or start a week, kind of transition into the next week's regular work of life. Take a nice big breath and a big sigh. Namaste, yogis.